Good evening. Welcome, everybody, to the November 25th, 2019 meeting of the Grafton Planning Board. We're almost at the end of the year already. First item on our agenda, as always, is public input. If anyone is here, wishes to bring a matter to the attention of this board that's not already on the agenda for tonight, now would be a good time to step up and have a word. Mr. Allen.
Hi. Yeah. I'm John Allen. I'm the economic development specialist. I'm the economic development specialist for the town of Grafton. The day after Thanksgiving, Shop Grafton 2.0 begins. This is very important to the community because it's the stores and the shops that create a sense of community and make a community vibrant. I like to encourage people to visit 10 different stores, get your card stamped, and you can enter to win a Nintendo Switch, an Apple Watch, or a Fitbit. In addition, some of the businesses are also contributing their own prizes. So I would encourage all of you to attend. If you live, shop, or work in Grafton, you qualify to win. Thank you.
I wanted to pass something along to you. Probably won't work this year, but please don't laugh at this. But have you considered inviting some of those, seeing if you could have them as Pokemon stops? That's not a joke.
I don't get what you mean.
You don't know what Pokemon is?
Do you know?
No, I know what Pokemon is.
Okay, these people follow and they look for Pokemon.
Pokemon Stop.
Oh, like the app.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The app, and it's still huge.
Yeah.
And that even encourages them more to go there.
Yeah.
I know that's
Yeah.
ridiculous.
Locations.
No, I understand what you're saying, and I have heard that the Pokemon things are very popular to the point where people go all over the place to find the Pokemons.
And I could tell you who knows a lot about it, the head librarian, because
Okay.
the library is a Pokemon stop. It's actually a gymnasium where they compete. Don't
Okay.
ask. Not me. I don't do
Now,
it.
is it
But I have a 30-year-old who does.
okay? Well, it's great for the kids. We're trying to get adults to shop as well.
Well, these are adults.
Yeah, the
Well-
adults are taking their kids around chasing the Pokemons, as far as we can tell.
Yeah.
But it might be a way for people to help pull in, because kids are with them shopping. Who's in charge of the banners that go out on the telephone poles instead of the flags? Did you see about that?
Park and Rec. Park and Rec.
Okay.
So you mean
Pass
like
it on.
the
Pass it on to them. You know what did you see the?
I think I know what he was talking about. I saw a
yeah.
post talking about there was a few people that were around town that were concerned about the fact that some flags were pulled off the poles before Veterans Day and replaced with the banners.
Oh.
Yeah, and there may be extenuating circumstances like the weather really messed up the flags a little bit before. But the people who are they're people sensitive to. Let's wait until after Veterans Day.
Yeah. So at least reinforce not us.
Not us. We begin the day after Thanksgiving. I'm going to leave some of the brochures up here and some of the cards, as well as pass them out to the audience. Thank you guys for your support.
Thank you.
Or at least we want to just put it on the table with the agendas. That way.
Yep. And I'll comment for your knowledge, John, but you don't need to stand at the podium for this, that I have personally seen some businesses already handing out the cards and doing stamps.
That's
You know,
fine.
I don't think it's an issue. I just figured that was worth calling out.
Yeah, I saw it.
That's perfectly fine because the goal is to encourage people to shop
Yep.
and support local stores.
Yeah, no, I saw the posting today where they were on social media. They were saying, we're doing the cards and there's this or that. So they're getting going.
And when you compare last year's brochure to this year's brochure, there's a lot more businesses. We don't have magical elves to drop everything on people's business stoops right on Friday. So, John started going out there last week with the brochures, the cards, and all that stuff. Still has more to deliver. But, it's not going to be invalid.
It's not going to be on ballot, and it's also going to be on the town's Facebook. You can see the opening announcement on the town's Facebook page, and we'll be doing regular Facebook postings.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Any other public input for us? Hearing none, we'll move on to action items. We have a draft decision on the request for special permit and site plan approval at 98 Worcester Street from the Grafton Water District.
David, I believe that you had submitted some edits for this.
I did.
I have not included them in.
Is it on the site?
Yeah,
Is the
Last-
draft decision there?
Last item.
last
Last
item.
item on there for the water district, 98 Worcester Street.
Am I looking at the right one, maybe?
No, you're not. There's only 14 exhibits on the windows.
Fingers are too big.
Yes, I think the only edit I had that I can see in my copy was in finding 6.
Sorry, Word is being a little,
Oh, yes.
because it keeps
It's
disappearing.
a space needs to move one left.
And then 2 letters need to be transposed.
Operate int
Yes.
A.
Yeah. INT space EH might be better. IN space THE.
Yep. And a little bit later on in that same sentence, I suggest that it should say there is no increase in impacts rather than there are no increase in impacts.
Well, if you say there are, then you want to be increases.
Yes, you could say that too. There are no increases in impact.
Match number and,
Yes.
what is the rule?
Sorry, there's just something going on. I actually think I just need to reboot because
Problem with the computer? Reboot.
yeah.
Yeah. Did you turn it off and turn it on yet?
Yes.
About half of what I used to do.
It's
And then show me, and that fixed most of the rest of it. Doesn't it too?
Oh, yes. First thing I do, even.
They used to
having-
get to be afraid to ask because they knew I'd say, show me.
First thing I do when there's an issue, even being in the tech industry, turn it off, turn it back on. Is it fixed? For me, it's usually no, but for other people's computers, it's usually yes.
Anyway, that was the only change I
That was the only.
identified in that one line.
Oh, that's why it's.
Do you have a solid state drive in there?
Yeah.
I think we can afford one if necessary.
No, I do. It
it's
wasn't
still-
letting me connect to town hall, so I think it was opening up the file and then not connecting to the network.
Nothing beats pencil and paper.
Rub it in.
Pencils never fail to.
Oh,
Pencils do, in a sense. I was going to say pencils, the batteries never run out, but eventually, when you have to keep sharpening the pencil, eventually you do run out of pencil. So even the pencil is not utterly foolproof.
so sorry, David. Where was it?
F6.
Bottom of the page, 3.
And then what was the other?
We could say either there is no increase or there are no increases.
Yeah.
I tend to lean
Yep.
toward is no increase,
Of course, I had to choose the opposite. Is
but that's just, if nothing else, that's my personal preference for the way I tend to think things should read.
your chair. Okay.
I can by no means be considered an absolute authority on English grammar and usage.
Okay. So was there anything?
I didn't find anything.
Okay.
If there are no other suggestions to change the draft decision, then perhaps a motion would be in order.
I move that we vote to accept the draft decision, and I think that's all we do, as written,
Make-
with the changes proposed.
Second.
Well, approve probably, but, you know.
All right. Motion made and seconded to approve the decision as drafted with the changes noted. And, yeah. Discussion of the motion, hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Declare the motion carried unanimously. Moving on then, we have another draft decision, this one on 11 Spanish River Road. And here, I think I had one, let's see. The finding numbered 15. Not F15, just number 15. And the second to the last word of that probably should be existing rather than exiting, because I don't think the
yeah.
house is leaving anywhere.
Yeah. Well, one of the main things is that this is not a addition, because the accessory apartment is going to be located within the existing structure.
Yeah,
Yes.
but it's exiting
So,
isn't the right.
you don't,
Well,
you
well,
don't
that's,
need
the whole
last
sentence
phrase.
is wrong. I mean,
Yeah.
that's where
Okay.
it's just.
The sentence could be construed as referring to something that's going to be added on to the outside of the house.
You know, I
Right.
think that, you know,
Earlier, somewhere in the decision, it references adding an accessory apartment within the house. So I thought about whether I should complain about the use of the term addition here, but I thought, well, it's a little bit off, but we do talk about the
well,
accessory apartment being added in a sense.
As a commentary for me, just to say it out loud, 2 points more in terms of format of this. The font choice between this and the other decisions we've seen is a little bit hard for my own eyes to read. I don't know how to articulate that very well. And the other piece is I've gotten used to and like seeing the idea of prefixing like the finding numbers by F versus just the numbers. That makes it easier to identify where we are in a decision. I don't know what changed there.
You
Just
think
figured
he's
to
fixing
comment
it?
on it.
brave. That's word, isn't it?
Word auto numbering, mankind's worst enemy.
Yes.
The
it could
whole,
be-
the whole word
It's
thing.
not.
If
It's not a big enough deal to fix for this decision in and of itself. But I would love that going.
No, it should have been there.
I have fought with word auto numbering more times than I can count.
Word and I don't get along very well.
I'll change the formatting, but that's just to remind me to make it consistent with how we have the others.
There you go.
And then you said it was, because the finding had to do with proposed accessory apartment use, blah, 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 is generally compatible with adjacent properties and properties within the district. Was writing the proposed accessory apartment being internal to the structure will therefore have no impact on the footprint of the structure and represent no
Yeah, we could,
no change that will be noticeable by adjacent properties.
yeah, you could look at finding 14, and there's a similar statement about, that makes it sound like an addition. You could edit that, the setbacks, because the proposed accessory apartment is internal to the existing structure,
Yeah.
it clearly meets the setback requirements. Required yards, no other open space are adequate.
So I just said the proposed use, comma, being internal to the structure, comma, meets the setback and other dimensional requirements.
Yeah. I like that better than referring to the addition.
Okay. Proposed, and then in 15, so the proposed accessory apartment being internal to the structure will therefore have no impact on the footprint of the structure and represent no change that will be noticeable by adjacent properties.
That looks good. Did I? Oh, yes. Moving on to finding 18 then.
Okay.
Finding 18 references a proposed development. I think the word development clearly is inappropriate there. Proposed use.
I mean, realistically, you could also say that this section was not applicable, because there was no change to the exterior.
Right.
There was no exterior change to the structure.
Did we adjust finding 13 with an extra use of the addition? The last sentence? That's less confusing than other ones, but
Yeah, no.
South additions.
I'm just quickly scanning just to see if there was anything else with the word addition.
I did a search. It's only 13, 14, and 15 had it.
Okay.
And here I was willing to leave the word addition in there. Reason being, going back to, where did I see that? Anyway, it doesn't matter. We've changed it, and that's good.
Yep.
I'm not opposed to the change.
Suppose that's a use, yeah.
Proposed use is residential. So I have then changing that to, because we're talking about as it relates to signs, exterior lighting with glare, traffic safety, economic impact. Proposed use is residential and it is compatible with surrounding residential uses.
This was the one with us pre-filled out for.
Oh, yes.
Yes, you're looking at the waivers.
Yeah.
I have, if Linda and Justin are willing to move and second respectively on the waivers, Joe will not have to change the language in the decision as drafted.
Oh, that's the one. Well, wait.
Yes.
Waiver 1 is left to be filled out. Anybody can move those. But
Oh.
waivers,
Oh.
waivers 2 through 5, we can save Joe some typing if Linda will move and Justin will second on each of those.
I move as was stated,
2 through 5.
2 through 5.
And if you want to be complete, cover 1 too. Joe will have to fill it in anyway, and regardless of who makes it. So if you want to make one motion on all 5 waivers,
Or you can also move, if we don't have any other issues with the decision, to approve findings 1 through 22, waivers 1 through 5, and conditions 1 through 6.
yes, if
That's
there
what
are,
I definitely,
yes, if there are no other suggested changes, although we can suggest more changes in discussion on the motion, it is my understanding that Mrs. Hassinger has moved
I second.
to find favorably on all the findings, to grant all the requested waivers, to approve the special permit with all the conditions, all as drafted, with the changes noted during discussion. Moved and seconded.
It was seconded, I believe, by.
Yes.
That same motion.
Mr. Wood seconded that
Yes,
whole
he did.
motion. So we now have one comprehensive motion on the floor. Is there any discussion of the motion?
Yeah, and getting the words all exactly right in these decisions we found just recently is important.
Yes. All right. With no further discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Declare that motion carried unanimously.
Do we have anyone here from 11 Spanish River? Okay.
okay.
All right, so that's done. Next on our agenda would be discussion items. As the time is approaching the 7:30 time for public hearing, I'm going to suggest that the 2 discussion items, either one of them will take more than 10 minutes, so.
You think they will? Well, the second one will.
They have the potential to take more than 10 minutes, so.
Yeah.
Opening the meeting does, come on.
So we will come back to those as time permits. General business, I don't believe we had any bills
Yes, we
circulated.
did. But
Yes, we did.
got
Or
enough
if we
signatures.
did, I didn't see them,
Well, you
We
will.
got enough signatures.
because somebody was not in the room when the bills were being passed around.
Yeah, I wonder who that was.
Oh, so just to make that complete, and then I can say that all the bills have been signed.
Oh, the meeting calendar.
We have a proposed 2020 meeting calendar.
Yes. So this is the proposed meeting calendar. This also serves as the foundation for our submission calendar, where then we identify, 30 days in advance of a hearing, provided meeting. The amount of hearings may have an impact on someone being scheduled for a meeting, but this is the foundation for it. For the most part, these are following the first and second and fourth Mondays. However, we have holidays, we have town meeting and the fall town meeting, so it gets adjusted a little bit. One thing just to point out, and December 28th, we'll add the 2-0 at the end. But put that in just to sort of avoid what happened this year. Because of only one published date, we got inundated with applications. And then because of the fact that they were stamped in with the town clerk, we start having to balance the 65 days to open a hearing Doesn't mean we have to continue and actually have dialogue that night. We have to open a hearing. I didn't want to have the board run into an issue where, and you know our luck, it would be advertised for January 13th and we get a snowstorm. Then we're trying to find an emergency meeting just to open up hearings. So, like I said, I'll talk to you more about my plan for dealing with those, but that's why I have that 28th. If nothing falls on, we could cancel it. We could also shift it because you have essentially, rather than from November 23rd to December 14th, we could also shift it so it's December 7th and then the 21st, or we could do a shift like that. We could do an audible in the month of October as we get closer, depending on what the board wanted to do. But we just kept it at the 2nd and 4th for the purposes of this meeting. And like I said, I'm just going to December. Isn't it great planning for December 2020? That's where, because we have Monday the 30th, then the 7th, if we, instead of doing the 14th and the 28th, we could also do the 7th and the 21st, so that we're a little ahead of the...
I'd rather think the 21st is the least desirable of the dates you've mentioned. I know the 28th is not real popular. It doesn't bother us too much usually, because we tend to stay home, but lots of people don't.
Yeah, the last 2 weeks of December can be problematic, but I would be comfortable leaving the schedule as proposed. If anything, we might say that the December 28th meeting is to be held only if necessary.
Yeah.
And it kind of goes without saying that the meeting schedule is subject to change should circumstances require a change.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, I have no issues on December for me either way.
I have an issue on October. There are 4 meetings in October.
No.
We only have 2.
Oh, 3. We have 3, then there's a town meeting. We have 2 and then we have a town meeting, right?
Correct.
Right.
Right.
Yeah,
That blows away every Monday.
right.
No, you got
One holiday. You give
One
me a break.
holiday.
Okay.
October 12th is the date that we would normally have a meeting, being the second Monday, but because it's a holiday, we don't.
And just on a personal front, I have a conflict on the 27th, but I don't have an issue watching a recording and mulling in if that comes to it.
And that
27th,
that's
which?
Of January, sorry. That would help.
and that's a
There were
given.
12 choices for that.
And that's a given if this is just what the regular schedule is. You have life events, work, vacations, Mullins are there, remote participation, worst case scenario. So
Yeah, I was only calling it out in case there was multiple people that had the issue, where then we would consider moving it just to have a confirmed or likely quorum. So
yeah,
It's shaping up like we're going to be busy in the January meetings.
yeah, potentially.
Well, look at this one. Next, whatever. You know what I'm talking about.
Yep.
Yes,
Ninth,
but-
I think.
Yeah, I think suffice it to say for now that for planning purposes, this pretty much mirrors the schedule that we normally lay out at the beginning of the year, and have done it this way for a good many years.
I move we adopt the schedule as presented.
second.
Moved and seconded that the board adopt the proposed meeting schedule. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Declare the motion carried unanimously. And the time is now 7:30, actually 7:31 to be precise. We have the continuation of a public hearing on a request for special permit and site plan approval at 13 Centennial Drive. And I know one of the issues that was left open from the previous meeting was the question about the general bylaw in the town limit of 2 retail establishments and how and where and when that limit gets applied. We received late this afternoon a memo from town council proposing, and maybe Joe can, hopefully we've all had a chance to read that, although it came out kind of late in the afternoon.
It is on our documents for this public hearing as well.
I'll give Joe a chance to weigh in on that as soon as he is able.
Sorry, I just wanted to make sure because also the reason the hearing was continued, not only get a response from town council, but also the board did ask that prepare a draft decision. There's a draft at the board seat. We have 3 other copies. I just want to, before answering your questions, so that if we need to make additional copies, just to ask who would like a copy so that we can make copies
Okay,
in the
good.
office. Is there anyone that's here for this public hearing that either hadn't received an electronic version of the draft decision or would like a hard copy of the MJ's Market draft decision?
I haven't seen one, but that
Okay.
might be.
Yeah, we try not to give decisions to attorneys, so.
Last thing.
But if anyone needs another copy, I think we have maybe one more, and we'll just have to make another one, so.
So basically, if I'm remembering correctly, that we've got the draft decision
Correct,
before us, and we've got the
yes.
question of the gatekeeper
Yep.
for the
Yeah.
town of.
So,
But the hearing is open.
so,
The hearing is still open.
yep. So, today posted for the board and distributed it to you by email. Opinion from town council Jenny Kramer regarding the question that the board had asked, and basically, essentially, to cut to the chase, it basically is her opinion, and especially because there's really lack of guidance from CCC as well as her local bylaw, that things would be tied to the Cannabis Control Commission when they receive applications, and once they are deemed complete, they have to notify, the commission has to notify the municipality within 60 days whether or not it complies with local ordinances. The idea would be that application number 1 is deemed complete, notifies the town. We say either say a special permit's already been issued or one needs to be issued. It complies, it's in the right district, it's on a appropriate lot, they have a host agreement, they had their community outreach meeting, and we have 2 licenses and none have been issued, so this complies. Same thing with number 2. Question becomes number 3, how that gets written. If two provisional licenses have been issued, this one would then therefore not be in compliance and would be in a holding pattern in case one of these 2 dropped through. That's essentially how town council views it based on current bylaws in town, as well as she did reach out to the CCC, and they really don't have any guidance as far as applying a uniform standard on how to deal with this.
They're busy moving right now.
I know. Your old digs. Your old digs, Union Station.
Very precisely, as a matter of fact, the same space.
Same
Yeah.
space, huh?
Actually, they're taking more space, well, maybe they're converting the meeting room to more office space. I had some,
So I know that the board had a lot of questions as far as how this relates to the planning board, what this process looks like. I understand that maybe this isn't as black and white as we hope all legal opinions get to us in and that type of shape. But given our bylaw and then also the CCC process, this is, and after consulting with other attorneys, I did meet with her to talk about process as well here. That's basically where the opinion came down.
Now, there were a couple of questions. You mentioned responding about the issuance or non-issuance of a special permit coming up at that point when the CCC says that the application is complete, or they have a complete application. I know that some of it needs to be done before. What I'm not sure about is whether the complete application can be done before the special permit, because they have to, the words are something like they have access, full control of the site and so on.
And that becomes, I think, a very legitimate question, and I think that is also highlighted that as far as town council's discussion or trying to reach out and get an answer from CCC, a little bit of uncertainty because it's the same thing we tell people in development team. Yeah, you're fine. You just need a special permit by the planning board. Those are super easy to achieve. But it does identify that, that's just by saying like, okay, do they comply? And telling the CCC, yes, they comply, but it requires a special permit,
Which they don't
which
have.
may or may not be issued. That, how then the CCC deals with that, I don't know.
Their problem.
They could still issue a provisional license and view the two things separate.
I'm interested in the complete application right now, not the provisional, and I think those are separate. I think complete application is notified, but then.
Correct. We have not.
I don't think that's also preliminary.
So
license.
I am not aware, because I'm sure it would have been forwarded to my desk, of any notice from the CCC on any applications that's been deemed complete and notifying the town of that determination. I'm not aware that that has happened for any marijuana establishment within town.
Yeah.
So exactly what their time frame is from when a application is submitted and received and back and forth in order to identify what then becomes a complete application, I have no idea as far as what that timeline ends up being.
Now, I have the impression that all the boxes are checked off on the application form, but then, okay, we have a complete application, but then there's the whole CCC vetting
Correct.
business before they get to a provisional license.
Correct. And that's the challenge, is that you could have an application in the system first. It potentially is possible that if there's outstanding issues, say with security plans that haven't been finalized, that one that's submitted a day later maybe had all that together and gets issued a provisional license. I don't. I'd have to do a little bit more research just to identify how, once you get your place in line, whether or not they're just going numerical down the line, or if something's
Nobody knows,
paused
as far as I can tell.
because they need item X. Do they then continue working on the next one? What happens if they
I don't think
have
anybody
everything?
at Union Station knows. At the CCC knows as much as I can tell. But all of this is on adult use. None of that, it's still a separate process, the old public health, whatever, process for medical. Because we have, what do we have? A couple of approved?
I thought, and the applicant.
No, maybe one approved.
And the applicant's attorney may be able to answer it. I thought when the CCC came in that they basically assumed a lot of the roles. And especially because here we're dealing with not only the retail, we're dealing with transportation, we're dealing with manufacturing, we're dealing with cultivation, and then there is the medical dispensary part. But I thought everything was subsumed.
Yeah, it's-
Well, who knows? No one knows. But my reading seems to be the CCC is busy in their spare time figuring out how to totally merge the existing inherited medical rules with their newly established adult rules. But the last I saw, they've taken over both the people and the role that medical went through, but that they hadn't actually folded.
It's my impression that the rules and regulations have yet to be merged.
Yeah, so that they would be still functioning.
Yeah, but on the medical, like we don't have limitation on the medical within our
we don't.
bylaw.
That's still separate in our bylaw.
Correct.
There might be something to be said for that, because there's something about no less recreational than medical. There's a place in there about however many medical you have, you can have.
Right, but I thought that had to deal with like when they were coming in as separate licenses, not when they're merged as part of
Yeah,
one
but
complete
we have
application.
one which is somewhere down the way on medical, the one that's coming in next time. I'm not sure how far they are, but I think that in that case, it used to be the letter of non-objection, I think reflected that they supposed to reflect that they met the requirements, the local requirements.
Yeah.
Which is sort of crossing over on this thing.
But as it pertains to the special permit application under discussion in this hearing, do we have any open questions regarding the application of the limitation as best as we can understand it today, as it applies to our permit?
Since nobody knows the answers, I want to be sure that we've done all we can to look forward and anticipate anything that we do now being the best we can do when the future comes. We keep seeing, as soon as you put something on paper, people start figuring out how to
And-
use it.
Yeah, and that's why within the decision, I basically started putting things into prior to the issuance of the building permit. You need to submit all the provisional license information prior to the issuance of a building permit. You need to submit the security plan and where was it? So applicant shall also submit to the planning board for its review and consultation with the building department a copy of air purification plan to ensure compliance with section 1.5.5B. That's a special permit provision regarding odor. That they should submit a final security plan following approval of the Cannabis Control Commission and the Grafton Police Department for the planning board for review, and shall provide a copy of the Cannabis Control Commission's provisional license and any supporting document indicating approval to proceed. Quite honestly, that's sort of like the only way I could sort of think about some of those things, because there's, through their process with the CC, they're going to be going back and forth refining a lot of those things. Outside of basically saying, hey, you got to provide us these documents for us to review, the only thing I was actually thinking about is that for each of these I need to add to review for consistency with this decision.
And what happens if we think it isn't consistent?
Yeah.
Gee, too bad.
No, I mean that's legitimately they could have a 30 by 30 addition on the side, and that is a huge air exchanger that was never contemplated. Taking things to an extreme in that example, but that's really the only way that I could think as far as trying to address some of these things when at this stage they're not at the point of having those things developed. And that's why when sent it out to the board, I also sent a copy to Mr. Foley. Hopefully he was able to forward to rest of his team as well, in case there was anything that's like, hey, this is absolutely wrong. Be beneficial to find out, especially because as far as permitting for the retail component, this ends up being our first foray as far as adding in conditions and thinking about this process.
Yeah.
To ask Joe, was there any other town decisions that you referenced for the wording here? Anything that I know each town is different anyway, but was there anything that helped launch us, or are we kind of in completely uncharted territory with this?
Well, I mean, we're not in completely uncharted territory. The main reason is that, like all special permits, we're always using the same format as far as making specific findings on the impacts to adjacent properties on health and safety. The special permit that the board issued for 8 Millennium helped frame some of the structure of this, because we had to deal with some of the same issues, and then fine tune it to reflect specific findings that need to be made under the bylaw. But you know, that's one of the challenges is that if we look at other towns as far as like model decisions, you then have to look at their bylaw, and when things diverge, and even how they then structure special permits and site plans as far as making findings, that's where it gets hard to say, well, I love Shrewsbury's decision, and you go, well, I can't even line that up with our bylaw and our process.
Yep.
So that becomes the challenge.
There was one other thing that I mentioned in our conversation, which is apparently it's possible to have local licensing. By whom, I don't know. Probably by the Board of Selectmen, maybe Board of Health.
Some towns have done it through the Board of Health.
Yeah.
As really more of a administrative type gatekeeper thing.
But like in Worcester, I don't know how Worcester's doing it, but it looks to me like it's essentially a licensing process, I think probably from the manager, the city manager, because they say he approved whatever, the 13th one and all that.
Yeah.
So at the very least, we might want to pass on to the Board of Selectmen that we encourage them to think about whether they want to have local licensing for this, like they do for alcohol, for example.
Yeah, but for here and now, they don't. For here and now,
No, they
here
don't.
and now,
They
Grafton
don't,
does not
but
have local license.
Part of putting us in the best place we can, passing that on would be good.
Yeah, I don't think that's particularly germane to the discussion tonight, however.
Well,
We're dealing with a draft, a public hearing here and a draft decision on one particular project, and I'd like us to try to focus on that so we can actually get it done.
So one of the other things to identify in the decision that I think it was identified in our last public hearing, that there's a divergence between hours of operation regarding what we have in the bylaw and what was in the host agreement. I summarized that in findings. Too far. Someplace here.
Need the Fs again. Oh, no, you have
F8.
Fs.
F8.
Okay, yep.
F8 and F9, I think.
Okay. So within the application, it was stated retail operation would be 10 a.m. to 11 p.m. Monday through Saturday and noon to 9 p.m. on Sunday. There was no specific hours of operation associated with cultivation and manufacturing operations, in that they may occur outside of retail hours as needed. So that was specifically within their narrative. Within section 5.10.4b, we have language that states the hours of operation shall be set by the special permit granting authority, but in no event shall a facility be open to the public, nor shall any sale or other distribution of marijuana occur upon the premises or via delivery from the premises between the hours of 8 p.m. and 8 a.m. So that by default, by excluding, means the only hours of operation are opening up at 8, technically 8:01, 8 o'clock and 1 second, until 8 o'clock at night. So that is a inconsistency that we did acknowledge at our last meeting. Because the bylaw, the way that it was written, and my understanding from during the public hearing that they would meet the hours of operation of the bylaw, I had included the following as a condition. That hours of operation for uses authorized by this decision shall be limited as follows. For retail sales, shall be 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. Monday through Saturday and Sunday noon to 8 p.m. I tried to keep the morning that they identified the same, and basically then mirroring the bylaw saying in no event shall the facility be open to the public, nor shall any sale or other distribution of marijuana occur upon the premises or via delivery from the premises between the hours of 8 p.m. and 8 a.m., referencing finding 9. I did identify that hours of operation may be amended pursuant to condition A2. A2 is a condition, just like we have our standard conditions, that if there's anything in this approval that the applicant is seeking to modify, they can come back for a public hearing. The board will have to decide whether or not, say for annual town meeting, because that's written into the bylaw, the zoning change would be necessary in order to change those hours of operation. Something to at least give thought about. It is possible for the board to basically put upon themselves the ability to establish, without identifying a time frame, as a proposed zoning article. But because we don't have that as such, that's why I drafted that decision in that fashion.
Did you see Brookline just voted to change the retail hours? Oh, yes, big deal in there. at Meta. The recreational was cut back to like 6 o'clock or something, but the medical is still a long time, because people.
Yeah.
It's a town meeting.
Mm-hmm. And I do highlight, because of the fact that, again, because we still have a continued public hearing, we haven't closed it, that this is something that getting the applicant's input to identify whether or not this interpretation of accurate would be beneficial.
Do you anticipate that with what we have, we're gonna be able to do a decision?
So that comes down to the last point, is that the only thing that I feel is missing is really the summary portion of the hearing proceedings, the findings, the conditions, the exhibits. This middle section talking about who said what the topics were discussed. I'm in the process of doing that. I did not get it in a condition that I wanted to print out and give to the board, especially because of the lateness in the day. I did talk with the chair, and we can talk about it later as far as ways to accommodate that. An example is, because it's procedural and doesn't impact findings, exhibits, or conditions, the board could appoint or designate 2 members to review that for consistency, and then sign off to allow for the decision to be signed off.
But we would take our vote tonight.
Correct.
With that provision.
Exactly.
That would be acceptable to me.
Well, let's see if we have any, if the hearing's still open,
Yeah.
so. Touch that.
Yes. Anything else from the board for the moment? Any questions, comments, discussion from the public, the applicant, or any other members of the public? To the extent that you've
There's
heard
a-
what all we've had to
Yeah.
say, we're trying to,
There's a lot we could talk about with the CCC, but we
yes,
don't
I
have
think,
enough time today.
Well, it's convenient now.
Yes.
You'll be able to go up there next week.
yeah, so by and large with, you know, the issuance of this special permit, really, you know, the next steps are for you to be dealing with the CCC for however long that takes. And whatever the outcome turns out to be. But that's certainly not under our control.
So based on that, I'll say I move to close the public hearing.
Second.
Moved and seconded that the board close the public hearing. Is there any discussion? Any desire for additional public input?
I wanted to ask him a question, but it's really separate from.
No further discussion on the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Declare motion carried unanimously. The public hearing is closed. And we have a draft decision in front of us, which we've been discussing somewhat already.
So, on my copy of the decision, we don't have exhibits 15 or 16 listed.
That is correct. What 15 and 16 end up being is the letter from Ginny.
We do have exhibit 15 referenced in our findings,
Yep.
finding 6.
So 16 is the one from Ginny, and then 15 is the host community agreement. I had reason why they're within the findings and not within the exhibit list is because I was basically telling Nitya, let's label this 15 and this 16. And as I was drafting through the decision, it's like, okay, take care of that. And it was at least an administrative oversight on my side not to go back and add those in as I had for the Mullen certification for Dave.
Yeah, there's,
And my additional related comment, sorry, Bob, is that I didn't see a finding that calls out that we received exhibit 16.
And let's see. I just have to pull in the article number because I think it's 32. Just forget off the top of my head.
there's a slight disconnect.
Yep.
On the front page, maybe I just missed what you were saying, but on the front page, the Mullen is mentioned as Exhibit 15.
Yep. 14
Yeah.
host agreement.
But
15.
also that could be, I don't know, maybe, this is like in the future, but now it's happened.
Yeah, I mean, I can also change the order because we did receive it.
Or remain eligible to vote. Yeah, I don't know whether you need the last part of it.
You're talking about,
Submission of the upon submission prior to deliberation.
yeah, I mean,
A slight rewording to reflect the fact that it has
It's
happened
happened.
and not will happen, or might happen.
And that article number, Joe, was 39, section 2.
okay.
Basing that on Joe's letter.
Other things just to highlight, there were two waivers that were requested. First had to do with the submission of a fully compliant site plan, and the rationale that was provided in the decision was that the applicant stated their request is due to their application proposing the renovation of the existing structure and that no changes are being made to the site that impact the footprint of the building or parking area. The second waiver was for a fully compliant traffic study, and their response was that a fully compliant traffic study wasn't necessary due to the remote location of the site and ample on-site parking. The traffic studies require going out a certain amount of feet to do traffic study. They looked at the specific intersection with Centennial and Pine Street, and then Pine Street and Westboro Road as the two items. They would have had to have gone larger internal intersections within the existing Centec Park, as well up and down. Their rationale was they were trying to provide similar information that was provided for the Nature's Remedy, and that given the nature of the use and that the impacts for a roadway network that were amply designed to accommodate it, they didn't think that a fully compliant traffic study was warranted, though they did hit on each of the main topics: level of service, projected traffic, turning movements, and all that. It's just they would have had to have done that analysis for broader intersections than the two that they specified.
There has been some concern about some of the intersection, the driveway into the train station and the intersection with Route 30 generally as to traffic issues and that.
And I recall one of the things that was discussed was that because the primary the peak hour ended up, I think, and I'm just trying to remember, it was like 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock, but I think it was a little before then where the peak hour occurred, and then the hours of operation were then starting after that, so that there wouldn't be the conflict within that peak hour.
Right, the traffic engineer has stated that the morning peak was not taken into account because the hours of operation were from 10 o'clock in the morning on. They did take into account the afternoon peak and a Saturday noontime peak.
Right.
And in both cases, if I remember correctly, they stated that the intersection in question was currently operating at a level of service C.
Which one?
And I don't remember for sure which one it was. I think it was it was probably Pine Street and Westboro Road,
I believe that's right.
and that
Yeah.
the traffic impact of this particular development was not going to change the level of service. It's not, I mean, level of service C is not great. It's not terrible, but it's not great. But this project has no adverse impact on the level of service.
I can see that I can see the argument for morning, particularly if maybe we have a little asterisk, where we're setting the hours of operation, mentioning that the morning time was a factor in deciding, somewhere we mentioned, so that there's at least a flag if they do want to move back into, at some point in the future, to an earlier time.
I should ask / note that we don't have a specific section for our waiver determination.
Yeah, that was going to be my remark as well.
Yep.
That finding 11 establishes that the waivers requested. We typically have a section just prior to the decision and conditions,
Right.
where we explicitly record the board's vote on the waiver request.
Correct.
I'm assuming that will be added.
That would be added.
But also, on what I was saying,
And what Bob
the
said.
the evening does run into rush hour.
Yes.
And I don't know whether we had an argument to cover whether the traffic's okay in the evening when it is rush hour.
So
The argument in favor of the waiver was that, I slipped my mind. We just heard it a little while ago.
I think it basically had to do that just the number of volume just wasn't that significant. So, for example, the table that you have on the screen there is the peak hour level of service. So what we'd specifically be looking at is the Westboro Road, Pine Street. And what you're looking at is that there would be a level of service C, which is in the future no build, which means they don't do the facility. And then the future build, where the facility is operational, you're talking about a delay of projected around 15 seconds for no build, 15.9 seconds. So within that peak hour, they're projecting, like about a second and about 7 feet more for queue length. So they're basically arguing within the peak hour that there is a de minimis change between no build and build future scenario.
And the train station is a little bit particular because the train arrives and a whole wave of people suddenly jump in cars and
Yep.
and drive out all at once rather than being distributed over an hour the way counting
Yeah.
usually does.
And where is the train station? Sorry. Where does the train station peak hour or the train station intersection factor into this? Is that the Westboro Road Pine Street intersection?
Yes.
That would be where you'd be capturing that. All basically that intersection would hit a good amount. It's not going to be all because there's going to be cars that don't even go into that intersection that are going to the commuter rail station. So if cars are coming from Shrewsbury to visit, so non-Grafton
Then they're not
residents,
coming down.
right, they're not hitting that intersection.
Right.
Those would be captured by the Centec Boulevard Centennial Drive intersection, where you're talking about, level of service A and then B at that intersection during peak hour with no build and build situation. That would capture traffic that under the no build would be going through that intersection heading out to Shrewsbury and Route 20.
So I'm reading here on page 9 of the traffic study. It says the peak hour is 4:45 to 5:45 p.m. I come that way every day, and it starts at 5:40. 5:40 is the first long train. The next one comes in 40 minutes after that, say 6:30ish. That's another huge. That's a 10-car train. So to Bob's point, that's the point of time when people literally run so they can stand in the queue to get out of the parking lot, right? how does that factor in here? Or is there a peer review?
So the challenge is when they're doing the traffic study, they're putting out the tubes, looking at the traffic over a whole 24-hour period. And they're finding in the evening the hour of time that has the most vehicles. You're getting that surge associated with the train, but that could be for 15 minutes. The rest of the time, you could have a consistent flow coming in from Route 20 to go through that Pine Street intersection on Westboro Road going out, or classes from Tufts let out and everyone's going out to go 20. So the surge that's associated with the train station for a 10-15 minute period may feel like a lot, but when you look at over the hour, it may not reflect that being the majority of the movement. So looking at the peak hour and the way that they calculate that, we'd have to then know outside of the commuter rail station what then those move-ins end up being, because they may still be more over the remaining portion of the hour, reflecting a higher use than that second commuter rail train pulling in that you were referencing.
Right. So what I'm trying to understand here is, right now it takes anywhere between 3 to 4 minutes to up to 20 minutes to get out of the train station. And when we talk about one train coming in and the next one is the longer one, I avoid that because it's going to take me half an hour if I'm the last person trying to get out of the parking lot. Is this going to accentuate or aggravate the situation or not, and how do we know that?
That part's hard to know because that's with the traffic coming out of the station trying to go left or right. And it is a single barrel. It's going to be depending on the flow coming down Centec Boulevard / Pine Street to then get to the Westboro Road and then divert either eastbound on Route 30 or westbound on Route 30. So you're going to have at this Westboro Pine Street within that hour you're going to have some cars that are projected, and let me just go through.
Keep in mind that this facility is only going to add maybe 10 cars an hour, if that, moving in and out of it. You know, it's they've got traffic all day long and into the night, but it's not like they're big numbers of like 25 cars coming in and out of this facility. It's
So
not gonna happen.
just for reference, the traffic study, the projected peak afternoon hour traffic generated by this facility to the Pine Street Westboro Road intersection is 11 cars over
Yeah.
the course of an entire hour.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say.
And the assumption, the assumption is probably that they're fairly evenly distributed across the hour. So that's like one car every 5 minutes.
Yeah, and some of them are going to be going north.
Yes, it's
To
11,
Route 20.
11 cars going south
Okay.
and 11 cars going north.
Right. So
So
you're
roughly
talking about,
speaking,
yeah.
This facility will contribute one car every 5 minutes to that traffic jam at Pine Street and Route 30.
And based on what? Based on what is the basis for that number? That's a projection, some empirical projection. Right?
Well,
It's
it
not
isn't
based on
completely empirical because there's evidence to see how much traffic goes in and out of already existing facilities.
No, this was just the net new addition, right? I thought that's what I understood.
Yeah. So
The
what they're doing is the ITE Institute of Transportation Engineers puts together a calculation book identifying sort of like studies as far as what traffic is generated based on a use type. So they're identifying based on a land use code associated with marijuana dispensary what they would project for trips that are generated from such a facility. So ITE will do studies across the nation and areas to look at, say, for a retail plaza or a multifamily, what a anticipated projection could be. Now, each project is going to have a little bit of nuances, but they're sort of gathering us together, saying realistically, we've created this model. Here's what we would project would happen, and that's where that 11 vehicles per hour here. They identified based on that ITE manual. Weekday peak hour entering the site and then exiting at 22. Weekend peak hour at 36 for a total of 72.
And so this 22 plus 22 is distributed in both the directions.
Correct.
Coming out of, okay.
And certainly some of that traffic could easily be people coming or going to the train station as well. So that wouldn't.
There could be double trips. They could
Yeah.
be leaving the train station going in.
That's what it wouldn't necessarily, if it's leaving the train station going in or going here first and then the train station, wouldn't necessarily increase the train's departure time,
Yeah.
traffic if in those.
And that's
areas.
where they're not looking. IT isn't looking to see, okay, you have these uses together. Here's where they sort of overlap.
Yeah.
It's imagining a 2,000 square foot dispensary. Here's what would be generated. If you had another use here, they'd say this is generated by that. There could be cross. So that could be a Dunkin' Donuts, and they get a coffee and all that stuff. There could be a little bit, but it's just looking specifically at the use to generate that anticipated vehicle trips. And again, vehicle in also has to exit. So those 44 trips could actually, 2 of those can be associated with one vehicle.
But they are making the trip. They are crossing that intersection, whichever way it is. Half of them are going up from Route 30, crossing the train exit or the railway station exit, and then they're coming back. So it's basically 2 trips there.
There is my pet peeve from when we approved this back in, in the dark ages. Hasn't done me any good. Centennial Drive was supposed to be a divided road all the way up to the turnaround circle. And somewhere along the line, people paved over the island in the area of this property and the fiber optic one beyond it, so that people didn't have to go up, didn't have to stay on the divided road. And I think I'm not sure, it may also affect the road into, or coming out of the bank on the other side. Never did me any good to complain about it, but it was part of the decision. And I've complained about it before.
Anyway,
Not that there's been a huge traffic.
right, back to our draft decision here. Is there anything else that we want to discuss relative to the findings?
The
Any other-
findings, I don't know if we need it, but I did notice at their meeting on November 25th was 4 times within the findings. That we voted to approve these following. I didn't see in my read of it, I didn't see a reason for that, but I figured I just
Sorry, what did you say?
the paragraph that's at the very start of all the findings is repeated 3 extra times throughout them.
Right, the findings have been divided into 4 groups, each group being preceded by,
Exact same.
at their meeting, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, I mean, technically I can just delete those. And again,
We've offered.
we actually used that. That's how we had done it with Nature's Remedy. And I basically just added in and customized things to do that. We used to break them up a lot more than what we now do.
Yes, and seeing.
Because some were site plan findings, some were special permit, some were then the local bylaw.
Yep, and under some circumstances, a board might consider each group of findings separately from the others. At least as of late, our typical procedure has been to make one motion to cover the entire decision. And so in that sense, this wording here is redundant, but otherwise harmless.
Yes, I would agree.
If you're gonna have that 2 people review later on, you can roll adjustments.
Yep.
Of that sort in with it.
Yes.
And if we knew what that motion would look like for the whole thing,
Yep.
It might even be time to make one.
And if there's no further comment on the waivers, then, or I mean, on the findings, we then have two waivers to vote on. A section will be added to the decision to reflect the vote on the two
Correct.
waiver requests.
Yep.
And, I guess we want to make sure, it's referring back to, comments that were made a bit earlier in the discussion, we want to make sure that the record of the vote on the waivers states the reason why if nothing else, referring back to the findings to, indicate why the board chose to vote favorably or not on the waivers.
Including the hours of operation impact.
Yes. And,
That could all be part of it.
yes. And
Famous
if the board is comfortable not requiring Joe to take the time to spell out all the details on the waivers, we could leave the wordsmithing on that and move on to discuss anything that we need to discuss relative to the various conditions that were put in here, and then ultimately we will want to have a motion and a vote.
I had a question. So what was the point about the waivers? Joe's going to list on the list of waivers.
I was putting a note for myself. So under finding 11, identified that they requested two waivers. One from a complete site plan, and the second from a fully compliant traffic study. They provided what they thought was appropriate information that then also looked at level of service, trip generation at those key intersections. There's additional intersections that the bylaw would have required outside of the Centec and then Pine Street Route 30 intersection that realistically, because of the distance, it's my opinion, I think it's redundant and not necessary because it gets at what we're specifically looking to see how this is going to impact that area around Pine Street, Route 30, and at the entrance for Centec Park.
Would this become a precedence for these other proposals that would come in? I know it's a case-to-case basis.
So for example, depending on where a new application is within the roadway network, you may want to have additional things to look at. Here, because this is part of an existing, already laid out and approved industrial park, there was a certain amount of traffic impacts that were assumed when the board had first approved this project. If there was an open site, we're not in that same environment. We're not in a dispersed area. And the board could say, okay, if bylaw requires that, we can always ask for more because we could be concerned about, say there was an elementary school down the road. I should not have used an elementary school as an example for a marijuana decision, but I said it.
Well,
Can't take it
more
back.
than 500 feet.
Exactly, it's more than 500
More than
feet.
500 feet, so.
So, bus schedules and peak hours. So, there are unique application things that then could push it for an expanse. We just have to justify our reason for that and why it ends up being.
Yeah. And I think in this case, a fully compliant traffic study would not add any useful information to the traffic study that they did submit. I think that's sort of the judgment here, is that the traffic study they submitted was sufficient, that a fully compliant study would not add any useful information.
For example, Centec Park. I'm sorry, not Centec. Grafton Science Park. That is the town owns Discovery Drive. That would require being within this study area. No one's using Discovery Drive outside of me, maybe once or twice a month, checking to see construction of.
Is work going on still at the lab back there?
Hardly any. Not that much. It's going on, but you're talking about a traffic generator?
Oh, no.
Not that much.
No, it's only a handful of people.
But you get my question, why I'm asking this, right? There are other applicants who are out there who are coming in, and I'm trying to understand if this is going to set the precedence. If we say remote, is remote going to be another legal definition that says kind of thing? This is what we define as remote, and that's not going to be remote. And then are we are we setting up ourselves for a conversation that could be avoided by, let's say, do the study? I'm not saying that we need to.
No,
I'm trying to understand what is that we are trying to get into here by for the future applications.
I mean, the main thing is that I feel that the traffic engineer has submitted relevant information that allows us to look specifically at the intersections that we would be concerned about. That result in potential impacts from this. I understand the view that the commuter rail station may be viewed as an intersection, but it's not a public way. It's not something that is controlled. It's a driveway. And, you know, it's the same thing. We're not studying the intersection of the State Street Bank within that development. We're studying the intersections that are nearby.
Yeah. I think in terms of worrying about whether we're setting a precedent that we should be avoiding, we have in the past granted similar waivers when in our judgment, a fully compliant traffic study was not warranted. Now, sort of the default position is always the fully compliant traffic study. And if it can be demonstrated that we will get all the information we need from a smaller traffic study, we have generally been willing to grant the waiver. And on the other side of things, on occasion, the fully compliant traffic study is really not quite enough, so we ask for more. But you know, there's a degree of flexibility there where we're trying to, in the board's judgment, we're trying to make sure that the traffic study studies everything that needs to be studied, and nothing that's really not relevant.
And it's not like there were elements of the traffic study they asked not to do. It's just that there was more things they should have provided the same level of analysis. So the level of service, peak hour, the traffic counts, they did that. It's just the circle was this big rather than opening it up, which then really didn't provide all that much data, because again, like Institute Road would have been farther away, and realistically would have had more impacts, because then you're introducing a greater traffic from a larger geographical area that it's somewhat remote from looking at that street network. You look at a place, if it was on Worcester Street, it may call for, you know, like so many intersections within such a distance. You may want to go out a little further because, we have traffic lights right outside. And you want to understand how that impacts the timing of signals that maybe aren't captured. So there is the ability for the board to then ask for more for the nature of this site, the development that it's in. I feel that it was an appropriate level to include in the.
I am curious what it is that causes the 15 minutes that you say it takes. What's going on? There can only be somewhere in the 51 to 100 cars involved, and there's hardly anything that I know of in the way of traffic. So how is it taking that long? What's happening?
Right. So it's only one car being able to come in, and one car. It's only a single lane, right? And that by itself it creates a bottleneck for the cars leaving the parking lot. Even if one car comes in every 5 minutes to the 11 cars per hour thing, even if one car comes in, that delay is marginal, but it's the line that forms behind, because there are about 150 cars or 200 cars parked, and at a given point of time during the peak hours, you can expect 50 to 60 cars trying to exit the parking lot. Yeah. That is what the exit out is very narrow. It's only one car out, and that creates a huge queue.
Well, it just seems like it shouldn't be that long. Is there very much pickup going on? In other words, if someone comes and picks up someone from the train, Because that adds a car without adding anything to the parking lot.
There is a decent percentage.
Because that adds to the number of cars.
Right.
I just, I mean, there's a push to increase public transportation, train and whatnot. Try to shift some more of the load to that off of the roads.
But MBTA is.
And there's a big push, the point being, okay, now they have to do something to have more parking, yet more parking.
Right, but
there.
they have to do, MBTA does nothing to improve the commuter's experience.
Well,
On the record.
but I don't know, the governor and people like that want to improve the situation.
Yeah, but I would be loath to try to deny anything that would be
Yeah.
negative from a one car to 5 minutes or kind of thing as far as delaying a single exit from another property that already exists. That's
Yeah, just for reference, for what it's worth, the existing peak hour traffic volumes in the weekday afternoon are something close to 400 cars coming towards Westboro Road on Pine Street. Now, not all of that will be. I can't tell from this diagram how much of that is from the T station, but a lot of it is. That's 400, roughly almost 400 cars in 1 hour in the peak hour that coming out to Westboro Road, whether they're from the train station or from Route 20.
Where was it counted? Someplace between the train station and Route 30?
Probably counted. I don't see off the.
That wouldn't surprise me. If two trains come
traffic
in,
counts were.
within that hour, you're going to have two trains. But they won't be dumping at the same time.
Yeah.
They'll be made.
Anyway, that's kind of we're kind of getting off topic again.
Yes.
Yep.
Conditions. Anything else that we want to discuss regarding the conditions on the draft decision? There was a remark made earlier regarding the conditions under B, the information that is to be submitted to the board for review. I think there was a sense that we wanted some potentially stronger language in there regarding what happens if the board finds that not satisfactory. And that's probably going to be something along the lines of, treating any changes as requiring a modification of the special permit.
Mm-hmm. So that's where when we review things for consistency with the decision, we identify then the looking at the material that was submitted, as far as impacts to parking, impacts to building, impacts to stormwater, anything that then ends up being viewed by the board as more substantial, and this is what I can put in there and then mirror it for 3, that the planning board for review for consistency with this decision, and I can put in language basically saying the board reserves the right to determine such information may reflect a change and may warrant formal modification of this decision.
Yes, if it's inconsistent with a decision, then it constitutes a potential change / modification.
If the board feels that it's inconsistent,
Yes.
the board is the deciding.
It's the board's judgment as to whether
Not
it's
some court
consistent.
or something. The board decides.
I have a question for you. So this one, and I read this 364. That's not coming in from Pine Street.
No, 364 is coming west on Westboro Road.
Okay.
And there's 364 going through, there's 146 turning up on Pine Street.
And this is during the peak hour.
Yes, that's the afternoon peak.
Okay.
Who's responsible for that intersection? Is it the state? Of the Route 30 intersection?
No, it's Route 30. We have jurisdiction.
In other words, who's gonna pay for the traffic light when the time comes? And the widening?
Wait for our 40R. We're going to be applying for Mass Works.
Well, no, that is.
Yes.
In terms of traffic and all of that, that's right across the street, right? And that's gonna generate lots of traffic.
No,
Right?
everyone's going to walk. No one's going to have a car there.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone's
Yeah,
going to
that's
walk
right.
All
across
the way
the street.
from wherever they, yeah, right. Now, maybe.
Nothing but walking, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
So-
are we good? And
So
Joe, you said
what I'll
you-
do is mirror for the other conditions. If the board feels the material submitted is inconsistent with the decision, the applicant may be required to modify this decision pursuant to condition A2.
Maybe we could make that walk only, one of the conditions when we approve that.
Anything else on the conditions here?
My only question on the conditions is, do we need to have any wording in relation to Ginny's opinion?
I would say no.
Okay, that works for me.
Because
She says nobody knows, basically.
Yeah,
So that won't help much.
it's, at least in town council's opinion, the issuance of a special permit or lack thereof has no impact on the,
She didn't say that.
Not-
She
not
just
quite.
didn't say anything.
Yeah.
She didn't say anything.
Yeah.
We could interpret what she
yes,
said.
my interpretation is that in the worst case, the lack of a special permit ultimately would
could cause it to not.
potentially kill the project, which would then take it out of contention for the count of
Right.
two.
But there's no hint in here of anything more we could put in this decision that would have the potential to help down the road,
Correct.
which was my whole point to begin with. Because being unknown, we need to try to think ahead. Planning,
Yes,
that's
and
what,
the-
we're
Planning?
planning.
What, we're the planning board, but the last thing we should do is plan.
Yeah, no, I know, we should just approve stuff. We should.
Yeah.
Anyway,
So granted that there are some considerable unknowns, which in some cases we probably, that things won't really be comfortably resolved for years. But we'll do the best we can with what we have to deal with here.
Yep.
Anything else? If there's nothing else, maybe a motion would be in order.
do we want to identify the two people we're designating to review the decision before we make the motion? To review the final draft?
That might come under discussion of the motion.
We could, yeah, that could be a,
Okay.
Yeah. Let's have a motion that mentions a couple of people, and then we can. But, Joe, what do you think a motion
So,
would look like?
Yeah.
That's what I was waiting for.
So
Let me
what
suggest-
I'd
Dumbass.
throw out there would be that someone moves to approve findings 1 through 33 to include waivers specified in finding 11 for site plan, for submitting a full site plan and a fully compliant traffic study, to approve conditions A1 through D2 as amended, and to designate 2 members of the planning board to review the decision narrative capturing the proceedings from the 2 public hearings to verify consistency with this decision and to authorize signature of the decision.
So moved.
Second.
moved and seconded, all that. Any discussion?
Yeah, but as soon as we vote on this, then we can figure out who the 2 will be, or how we decide who the 2 will be. Then we can decide who they'll be.
We could name the two as part of the motion, but we didn't
No,
have to.
it's
The
not in
motion,
the motion,
the motion
which
as
I-
it stands.
Move the question.
The motion as it stands is to designate two members of the board to review the portions of the decision.
I'm
Yeah.
comfortable with that as motioned.
All right, any
Yeah.
additional discussion on said motion?
Actually, both are valid. I just-
Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Declare that motion carried unanimously. And staff will be completing the drafting of the decision, and two members of the board shall,
I move that one of the two be Dave.
And
And I move the other to be Bob.
yes, how about,
that was gonna be my exact motion anyway. Was that
so let's simplify it in terms of Justin moving that Dave and Bob be designated to review the draft decision.
Second.
Discussion of said motion. Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Declare that motion carried unanimously. Wow, took us a while to work through all this, but we'll get there.
We own our, we earn
We earn our pay.
our pay.
In fact, I think we deserve a raise.
Yeah, a percentage raise, yeah.
Alrighty, so that
What's
being
the minimum
done,
wage for a planning?
I'm assuming that perhaps no later than the end of this week, the drafting will be complete.
I'll be finishing that tomorrow.
The end of this week
Is
comes
like
a little
Wednesday.
earlier than that.
Yeah.
That's right, this week.
There's no Thursday and probably
Remember,
no
this is
Friday,
Thanksgiving
Yes.
at least here in the building,
So
for us.
that suggests to me that perhaps it could be anticipated that the decision will be complete and reviewed, say, Monday, by Monday or Tuesday next week.
My plan would be to finish it to email to both of you, and end of day tomorrow. So
End of day tomorrow. After which, we may or may not have time to complete our review by the end of the day Wednesday, which
Yep.
is why I'm thinking it's probably reasonable to expect it to be
Yep.
finalized on no later than end of the day Monday.
Yep.
Yes. I wouldn't say it absolutely has to be though, in case something comes up. You don't want to create a,
No, I mean, this is just informal, saying what we're,
Yeah.
what we're kind of thinking.
all right.
Probably, given that you guys still have to work through the CCC, a few extra days to get this permit done is not going to delay
Time to
you.
work through the CCC.
Yeah.
Slow.
Listen, after this, that should be easy.
Yeah. Greener pastures, right?
All right.
If
Thank
they ever
you.
get moved in and have telephones,
That's-
things like that.
All righty.
Ball game.
So, now we can circle back, I think, to a couple of other
Deliberation.
major items. Deliberation on the Wheeler Road special permit. This is just deliberation and with the intent of answering some questions of the drafting of the decision is not yet complete.
Correct. So, what I have for you, just getting some other things, is essentially it's a 4-page document, a grid, just trying to review for the board the information that we have that is essentially relevant for the Wheeler Road subdivision. What I'd sort of like to do is just go through each of the findings that we need to address, and then we can have that discussion specifically as far as
Is,
waivers.
is that worksheet on the website?
Yes, it is. If you'd like, because this is also 8.5 by 11, I can just send a
I-
couple copies
I-
to the board.
I
mean,
looked
to
through
the
it and I don't
printer.
really need to, I just would like to have
it's
it.
on our meeting
Yeah. the
meeting
link is
page rather than the
Project page.
Not on the project page, yes.
So confusing. Huh. Yeah. course, the type is too small to fit on this little screen.
So like I said, if it's easier, we can just have some copies printed up.
Oh, that's okay. I looked through it and I didn't offhand find anything I had issues with, except when we get down to the waiver. Yes, you give us some information,
Yep.
but
Well, that's where this is information. Because what I wanted to do is just identify for each of these findings, just pull out the relevant information that the applicant or during the proceedings had pulled out. So, for example, in the board's decision, we always make findings under some of the special permit granting provisions. So, first one being ingress and egress to the property, proposed structures, so automobile safety, and this is where it comes into those waivers. Subdivision road is located 415 feet east of Meadow Lane and 315 feet west of Worcester Street. They did, yes.
I thought we had a smaller number than that eventually.
I think what maybe could lead to the confusion is that in the narrative it talks about a equidistant, and I had asked the applicant's engineer just for verification because they did show a board, and then with the specific distances to Worcester Street and then to Meadow Lane, and those ended up being those distances. So those end up being accurate as far as where it stands within the Wheeler Road layout of the proposed access to those two roads. They identified as part of the traffic study that stopping site distance is 315 feet, which is basically from the entrance, from Worcester Street to the entrance, and 500 feet looking west. And then we also have intersection site distance, which does identify that there are some obstructions. Looking to the east, there's a tree, and then to the west, tree, and then a telephone pole, and then it opens up again, and then it becomes the vertical curve of the street that provides the site distance. To let the board know, especially the new members, when we're talking about site distance, there's two things we're looking at. We're looking at not only intersection site distance, so imagine you're pulling up to an intersection and you're looking in both directions. You have this site triangle that's being created. So you're looking at an angle. You measure the distance from along the road. That's your intersection site distance. Stopping site distance is you're a traveler on the road. You see an object going at the rate of speed you're supposed to be going. How long does it take you to stop? So those two things. If you pull out of a intersection for the subdivision road, your car stalls, someone coming down, one, they're able to see, but also able to stop. That's where those two distances become important. The traffic study did recommend to the east, and to the west, some clearing to achieve site distance. Very often, especially when you're developing a site, there's existing trees that are there that, of course, as part of the development project would be taken down, but that you would need to take down those trees to achieve site distance. They are proposing sidewalks, so this is pedestrian safety and convenience. They are proposing sidewalks on the east side of the road, but there are no sidewalks in Wheeler. And also to the trail network, Grafton Land Trust, there are no designated trails within the development to that open space. Traffic flow, it's pretty straightforward. The proposed road is 444 feet long. And access in case of fire. As the board knows, there's a little bit of staffing flux in the fire department. We actually did not, through the proceedings, receive written comments from the fire department. However, we know that the roadway is designed to be compliant, meaning that it's a compliant width, and that because of compliance with the subdivision rules and regs and the fact that we're just dealing with a cul-de-sac, that's less than the maximum length within the subdivision rules and regs, identified that the roadway conforms with regulations.
We don't have a traffic study in this case.
No, not for the number of lots that are here.
Right.
However, none was required under Article 8 of Section 8 of the zoning bylaw, but they did provide traffic information that looked at site distance and safety aspects.
What I'm getting at is, what is the current level of service at Wheeler Road and Westboro Road? Worcester Street, Worcester Road.
I'd have to verify. I don't believe that was something that was studied within the
No,
traffic document.
I do think, I'm hoping I'm not inserting foot on this one, but that there was testimony that said that Wheeler Road and Worcester Street was already a F.
yeah, my empirical look at it is certainly at peak time, it is F. And that makes a big difference as far as I'm concerned. F is the worst. The worst. F is for fail.
If I remember correctly, the last time when we discussed this, there was another development upstreet. I thought you pulled up that there was a traffic study associated with that.
Up the hill that there was a 40B,
Right.
and that may be where the F came from.
It may have come out of that report. I don't remember pulling it up specifically. The documents that they had referred to within, whoops, that was waivers, sorry. Yeah, here they're just talking about site distance, intersection site distance, stopping distance. I'd have to go back and probably look at some of the material in the minutes to see as far as level of service coming up in testimony. I know it's not in any of the submitted documents, so it may have come up in oral testimony as it related to what was found, because the engineers were also the same engineers that prepared the plans for Elm Rock, that 40B subdivision.
In any case, through personal experience, I know that you can spend a long time, and everybody on Worcester Street can spend a long time, and certainly everybody on Wheeler Road can spend a long time waiting to get through that intersection, particularly the left turns.
My question would be, does this project have the potential to make that significantly worse or better? What's the impact of this project on that traffic?
My point is, we're being asked to give a waiver for the distance down to that intersection, and to me, that makes a difference. The fact that intersection does not work makes putting more roads close to it even less. I mean, we have a rule. The rule says no, you can't do it. In this case, we have a particular situation more so than most projects, and that's why.
My question to that, Bob, is what if this was at exactly the limit in our rules? They didn't need a waiver. Would that be any materially different as far as the conditions on the road with an F intersection there to make this any different?
Can we,
A waiver is a different
Yeah.
question.
when we get to talking specifically about the waiver, let's
But the
discuss that.
material that he's putting up there is leading to that
We
question.
will get to the waiver question. Let's see if
So
think about the rest of this.
Yeah, the other items basically just, impacts on adjacent properties, adjoining adjacent properties within the district. There's no off-street parking. Driveways will be provided for each lot. It talks about the bylaw talks about off-street loading. This is residential development, so it doesn't apply. Economic impacts, the surrounding uses are residential in nature. The site does abut Grafton Land Trust and is close proximity to Worcester Street. Noise effects, density of development would likely generate noise levels exceeding existing ambient levels. Because of partially because the site is primarily undeveloped. However, residential use is in keeping with the subdivision, and that there are a number of frontage lots. To be added, I should have probably added that because of proximity, noises associated with the street realistically are going to provide more background level noises than the development. For refuse and services, basically it's just a residential development. This currently the street's still being designed to comply with subdivision standards that would make it eligible to be taken over by the town. Trash, of course, would be something that would be curbside pickup. So there's no special provisions being made like as if it was commercial or multifamily development. Screening, there's existing vegetated cover to be used as a buffer and screening. The applicant will be deeding a portion of the property to the Grafton Land Trust to provide for more buffer area adjacent to existing Grafton Land Trust parcel. A strip of land along the western property line will be retained in existing conditions and act as a not a butter, but as a buffer between proposed lots and neighboring lot. Of course, going to the next item, signs and exterior lighting. There are no signs being proposed. For yard requirements, the preliminary plan has adequately addressed these issues, mainly that they are providing the open space requirement that's needed. This would be further refined during a definitive plan permitting phase. General compatibility, identified that property contains single-family residence and a few accessory structures. The area is essentially residential in nature to the south, east and west. North is primarily open space. This is going to be going to the next item, any impact for public or private water supply. They're going to be serviced by Grafton Water. Also, they're going to be on municipal sewer. Resource protection, and this is, I think, one of the main elements that we'd be looking at as far as the value of this item. Property is adjacent to Grafton Land Trust, Ekblaw Landing. The applicant is providing an open space parcel that will act as a buffer to existing trails on the adjacent GLT land. A swap of land is also proposed to move the detention basin farther away from GTL trailhead compared to initial drafts of the plan. I did make note that Wheeler Road is not a scenic road. Then we get into the specific provisions of the flexible development bylaw. Findings that we make is in intent with the bylaw. And I just identified that it complies with specific requirements for dimensions, setbacks, and area calculations. Is a flexible development special permit in harmony with the existing and probable future uses of the area? I did identify that flexible development plan creates an open space parcel that increases the buffer between adjacent GLT land and house lots. Surrounding area includes residential single-family subdivision and frontage lots on Wheeler Road. Another condition, whether the special permit is on balance more beneficial to the town than a development likely to occur without such approval. What this means is that if granting the special permit is a benefit versus the conventional plan. So looking at whether or not it was more beneficial, I identified that the flexible development plan clusters the residential units towards the rear of the parcel, maintaining the existing residence that fronts on Wheeler Road. The conventional plan would have brought units forward, made them more visible along Wheeler. also to comply with section 1.5.5 for special permits, which was covered above. The last one has to do with Board of Health and on-site septic or sewer, and just identify the development is connected to public sewer. The last two items are really sort of the nuts and bolts as far as what we're dealing with, as far as waivers that are required to allow for the development to occur. Starting with the lesser impact, the last one first, they are requesting a waiver from providing streetlights. Streetlights are required at a minimum at intersection. It's in every 300 feet and shall be approved in accordance with all requirements of the select board and utility provider. The applicant is requesting a waiver from providing streetlights due to the small size of the development, and that lights will be provided on each lot.
Do we have any input from the selectmen who are the final word on streetlights?
No, because they're requesting a waiver. So
Well,
if the board grants a waiver, then there would be no streetlights to go in front of the board of selectmen for
right, but
electrification.
often the selectmen have their own idea about whether one's needed or not.
Yeah.
And it'd be interesting to know.
Yes, I'm remembering a prior subdivision where this board recommended and required a certain number of streetlights, and the select board initially said no streetlights, and I think a compromise was reached where there were some streetlights, but not what we thought there should be.
And my understanding, because that happened at Gristmill,
Yes.
where they our regs called for it at the cul-de-sacs, at the intersection, and then at the street, and that they just did it at the street and then the intersection, reducing the two. That ended up occurring at the definitive stage, and would probably be appropriate to then raise as an issue to engage the select board at that time.
So we could either grant or not grant such a waiver now. It would,
The board could grant, the
subject would be
board could
revisited
say
at the
that,
definitive.
okay, we don't want one at the cul-de-sac, but you know what, we need one at the intersection. And so you deny the waiver partially because you want one at the intersection of the proposed road and Wheeler Road. But that waiving the rest is
yeah,
fine.
that would, just off the top of my head, I would suggest that a streetlight at the intersection would be appropriate.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't, given the length of the road, I don't feel strongly about one at the end of the cul-de-sac, but I would propose one at the intersection, and the select board may or may not go along with that.
I think that the distance from the intersection to the end is more or less comparable to the spacing we see on many roads for lights. But there is a light at that distance. You know, if I'm out walking, I have 400 feet between lights or whatever. Here you won't have that.
Yeah, I don't have any strong opinions for or against what you proposed.
You probably don't walk on the unlighted roads.
My neighborhood is unlighted for the most part, as far as many of the roads along it, but yeah.
But
Yeah.
you go out
I think it,
on the unpaved road or almost unpaved road, so you break your ankle walking down the.
yeah, at this stage of the game, that particular detail, among others, would in any case have to be addressed at the definitive plan stage.
Yep.
And so a decision one way or the other here is probably not that critical.
Wasn't it a waiver that we're supposed to be being asked about now?
Yes, there is a request for a waiver from the requirement to provide streetlights. And we do need to act on that request one way or the other.
Yep. And I mean, also the main thing is that can be included in the decision. I think I've heard a consensus as far as that that if there is to be a subdivision road coming out onto Wheeler, that a street light would be necessary to illuminate that intersection, especially if there is a sidewalk the sidewalk would potentially be used for school pickup. Mornings can be pretty dark as well, so I think there would be an argument to say required at the entrance, but then further in the cul-de-sac. Sort of how the Board of Selectmen approached Gristmill Village, relying on lampposts. That would be part of the development to provide lighting, at least maybe an initial start.
So at this point in the discussion, since the decision has not yet been drafted,
Correct.
it's, for your purposes, for drafting the decision, it's sufficient to have a sense of where the board is likely
Yeah,
to go.
the board doesn't have to take a formal vote. If you do, great, but we'd be revisiting that. I've essentially feel that I've gotten a consensus regarding that item as far as how to draft that.
Okay, so enough said for the moment.
Enough said on that, yeah.
Are you saying a light at Wheeler Road, but not a light at the other end?
Correct.
I'd like us to.
And-
Well,
and-
first of all, I would like to have a definitive plan that shows me this lighting on the individual lots so that I can tell how good it would be
And
before I grant that waiver.
so, and
Based on that.
that's one of those things that, in the decision, part of it is we have to evaluate some of those other findings in issuing the special permit for the flexible development. But the other is also to provide recommendations for the definitive stage. And it is appropriate to the board to say that we are not going to grant this as part of this application. At time of definitive, in order to consider this waiver again, we want some additional information, including
what I'd
blah, blah,
like.
blah. Okay.
That could work. Comfortable with that?
I am.
Again, we can, we can
Yes.
revisit the thinking on this when we actually have a draft decision in front of us.
Certainly.
And if the wording, to make sure the wording reflects what we want. And we are left with the elephant in the room, the waiver on separation of intersections. And for what it's worth, I'm satisfied, I'm quite willing to grant the waiver on the basis of the site distances being adequate, there being no likely issue of conflicting traffic. And to Justin's point, this is, what's the number?
I can look it up.
300.
315 feet away from Worcester Street. The impact of the traffic from this subdivision on Worcester Street will be exactly the same if it was 600 feet away. So I don't see that 315 feet is in any way detrimental to traffic, and I don't see any way that 315 feet or 415 feet in the other direction is detrimental in any way whatsoever, because the traffic safety, my traffic safety concerns are completely satisfied. So I'm absolutely willing to grant the waiver.
So that's a change from the adoption of the rules. The rules say 600 feet. It doesn't say unless the board. With the criteria you just outlined, everybody who comes in from now on can claim the same benefit, or everyone who comes in the future who can claim the same
And I would think that
factors
I would be the same.
will be entitled to a waiver also. And I'm not,
Then why do
not
we have
ready
the
to do
rule?
that.
Now, my problem with the 600 feet is that the rules and regs give no reasoning whatsoever for the choice of 600 feet. Why is it 600, not 500 or 700? It's an arbitrary number, and because there is no reason given for it, I have no criteria by which to evaluate whether I should grant the waiver. So the only thing I can come up with is related to traffic, which is a criteria I'm quite comfortable using. And in fact, I would recommend that the rules and regs be rewritten to make that explicit, because the 600 feet, I don't know why it's there. And because I don't know why it's there,
I think,
I can choose my reasons for waiving it.
I can too. I think that the reason it's there is because when rules and regulations were being written, these rules, the length of the cul-de-sac, the dead end and those were customarily, done in this way. And with numbers similar to this in many places like ours.
If I may, Bob, in my industry and life, I've never been satisfied with we do it this way because it's the way it's always been done. I like knowing the reasoning behind it, and the reason initially could have been completely valid, but it wasn't written down. And that reason may still be valid today if we knew it, or it may not be. And that's just a general rule of thumb I go with. That
My experience on this.
No, I think that the reason starts with what kind of road network do you want laid out?
Yep.
That's the town wanted, or the planning board in those days wanted that kind of a layout for roads, not a whole lot of little short distances. It had nothing to do with traffic as much as it had to do with the road network, how many intersections there are and so on.
So my 2 cents on this as a trained civil engineer, having majored in transportation engineering, these are not based on arbitrary numbers. There are sound bases based on which they come up with there should be the distance based on the gradient, based on the property, how it is going to be used and stuff. I don't profess to have knowledge of why the 600 was. I know that based on my study or my understanding of what I learned in school is that these numbers are based on some scientific principle of why they came up with. That said, my comfort is I do, in a sense, agree that by adding this 6P, 7 units, right? 7 units?
6 new units.
6, okay. So adding the 6 units, that's not going to cause a significant traffic flow into the already existing traffic onto the Worcester Street. That part I get it. So I go back to one of your earlier guidance in prior meetings was by giving this waiver, what's the benefit to the town?
That's my question.
Right. So I was asking earlier in those conversations for this particular subdivision discussion was, do we get land for the trail or so on and so forth, which those are the things that were provisioned for. So I tend to create the bake-off between if there is a benefit, is there quantifiable benefit for the town? And that's what I see as the benefit. So I feel comfortable going ahead with the waiver from my perspective. I do agree with Bob's piece that if you do this sets a precedence. And then do we at least come up with the criteria for future approvals that, okay, anything if we do provide or give this waiver, what would be the benefit? Is that quantifiable enough? Is that benefit enough for the town?
And even if we do look at the idea of saying, okay, maybe we should revisit this and see what is a distance from intersections by looking at other towns and looking at what is out there as civil engineering practices now. If it turns out that this is under, that we really don't need to change it, then we have allowed a waiver based on just seat of the pants. And does that mean then if we want to keep 600 feet because it turns out that is good practices, have we kind of blindsided ourselves? I just don't, that's the struggle I have with this. Yeah. And I don't fully see yet the benefit for the town because the trail already exists. Mm-hmm. The town isn't really getting that much. It isn't really getting anything at all. The trail is there. So I need a little more persuasion. I mean, it's not that 600 feet is something that I feel is written in stone, but it is written in our bylaw. And maybe
Correction, not in the bylaw.
What?
It's in the regulation, not the bylaw.
Okay.
Keep that in mind.
So my point is, though, it was put in there many years ago. Now, maybe that we should revisit it, but I'm not sure you can say, well, you know, I don't like it. Well, you can say that. I don't care. It's,
Yeah, I've struggled with this for almost 10 years, and I've never been comfortable with this. And I think it's, if anything, my thinking has been clarified a little bit. I cannot make myself comfortable with it, with the 600 feet as a requirement, as an absolute requirement.
well, I don't know where it came from, so I don't have
That's
any.
right. That's my problem. I don't know where it came from, so I don't know how to defend it.
It was
But
in
I-
the very, very first subdivision rules and regs and had never been revisited since. So you're talking 1978.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
But there must
And-
have been a basis, and that's what I don't
and that's
know.
where, you know, I think that's one of the challenges is that, and this is the example. This is ideally what you'd have. You know, power line, Trinity, having a road network. When you're dealing with larger areas, this is ideally what you want. The problem becomes, fast forward, I think it's saying 40 years, but we're just about at that. Sorry, we passed that.
Yeah.
And the challenge is that think of almost all the applications we've seen in the last 5, almost 6 years since I've been here. It's all infill development.
Yeah.
This is the ideal. You want, this should have marched up Pleasant Street in sort of in that formal fashion. The challenge ends up being you're left with things like this where it's like, okay, well, that property came up and then another, and what ends up being a waiver to be granted. And Peter's Way is an example where they had one structure has 2 affordable units, and it was a flexible where then there's open space that was given to the Conservation Commission, identifying what is a community benefit that could be granted. So it absolutely is, you know, the challenge as far as looking at the regs that wanted to identify what the ideal would be, and then running into a infill development situation where it can't be because those 600 are taken up, and it's either you are then disallowing, say, the development to happen because of not granting a waiver. That's where the challenge ends up being, and it is tough. It's the same thing with maximum length of dead end street. I think maximum length of dead end street is even worse because you can go to every single town around us. They all have different than 500 feet, and it's all more. There's no sight distance is easy. Take a speed, friction, foot on a brake. You know when you're going to stop based on a certain speed, and if there's an obstruction in it, it's hit. It's not safe. There's some other of these that are a little different, and you know, it's something that when we write the decision, one way or the other, whether it's granting the waiver or not, we have to be able to then identify the reason why. And that's why I put together the grid, is to have that conversation so we can identify we're not granting a waiver because of this.
Now, you all know my position on that. Each of you gets to decide how you want to vote on it.
And I will say, for me, the fact that there is some benefit, you know, different people have different opinions on how much that affects this waiver decision, but towards the town does help me say yes ahead of our rules and regulations being adjusted.
I would say that in terms of if we do approve this, we have to go back and we have to look at those rules and regs, and we have to get advice from someone who, you know, and look at other towns and look at what is considered good safety standards and incorporate that in. We can't just keep
But that's
running
where,
into this.
like, the 600 feet isn't safety. That's
It
a land
isn't-
planning
got-
tool.
It's not safety.
No, it has to be something. I'm sorry.
No,
There should be some basis for that 600.
what-
Safety could be one
It's
of
what do you want the town to be? where you were on Pleasant Street there.
Mm-hmm.
The internal road network, like at Hollywood Garden, for example, is one thing. But where the roads intersect with our main roads, the town unfortunately does not have a distributed road network so that you have multiple options on ways to go. The town is very much just the 1700s roads as the main roads. And I do not want a street every 200 feet coming out onto Pleasant Street, period. So I'll have a difference between, I could have a difference between the main roads and the internal roads. It's about what we want for our town, for our road network. And I feel my standard has always been, is there a sufficient benefit to outweigh the deficits in each of these cases, or to be enough for me to be willing to grant a waiver. And in this case, as Linda said, I don't think that what we're getting is enough. I asked for an affordable unit. If we have gotten an affordable unit, I think that would have been a compelling reason. It's not to be had. I don't think that the benefits that you're citing, that's just me and you.
Yeah. And that's where, like, I can understand for affordable unit. When you're dealing with developments this small,
Yeah, I understand.
you have to throw in two. You have to say, take what would be a normal single-family structure and throw in two affordable, because you can't make the numbers work. There's not enough that can be made in a development to subsidize the difference between a market rate and what you have to sell an affordable for. You have to make up $300,000. That's a
I don't know
lot.
what you were saying about two.
Peters Way, one single-family structure, so it's sort of a colonial, looks like the others, but it has 2 units in it.
No, it's a two-family.
Yeah, it's a two-family. That's how you get numbers to work, but it ends up being a density that's higher than, what the underlining density would actually be.
So we've been off and on over some number of months, maybe years, discussing the need to update the subdivision rules and regs. And one part of that topic needs to be, let's revisit, sort of the basic philosophical question that Bob had, or the point that Bob has. What kind of road network do we want the town to have? For us, it's in 2019 and going forward, given how the town has developed and what opportunities remain for development, what kind of road network would we like to promote going forward? What was good, what was deemed as good 40-some years ago may or may not be suitable today. In some respects, I'm suggesting that it probably isn't, but we need to, it would be good for us to sort of take a look at that independent of any particular project. But before us right now is one particular project and a question of whether we, as a board, are willing to waive a particular requirement.
I want us to change the rule first. Because otherwise, we will continue as we have for years and years and years, just deciding each time, and not having any real established criteria, and certainly nothing that our council could use to support a decision that we make, to waive in one case and then not waive in another.
Can I go back to the question on the benefits piece of it? Do we have any documentation of what are the benefits? I felt, my understanding was, based on how the Cub Scouts team has used, the pack has used the trail. The trail was actually using the private property. We were actually trespassing the private property. That part I realized. And that was what I was mentioning in the prior meetings also, that if we need to have that, we need to move it up. Otherwise, the trail, as we know, doesn't exist.
Why do you end up on the private property?
it is open and available, and we were wandering, and it's an open land there, so that's how we end up. There's an dilapidated building out there. We go past that, and we have a cub meeting there. That's what it was. There was nothing more to that piece.
Okay.
There is no demarcation to say this is where public property is. This is where, and what we know of what the public property was, that is marshy land half the way through.
Okay.
So
I mean, one of the things is you have this corner of the property, which the trail continues and actually goes through wetland area. You know, it is pretty easy because, I mean, you're talking where the existing trail is and then where the property line is. You know, you're talking about 15, 20 feet. Depending on seasonal variations, people could meander. It's not like there are sections when you get down here in the wetlands where it is vegetation on both sides of you. You know, it allows for potential relocation of trails, especially as with changes in climate, it is foreseeable that wetland systems and water bodies may change and alter. And you know, it also serves to protect areas within the riverine zone. So 100-foot riverfront and the second 100 riverfront basically takes care of that corner, and at least is a way of protecting it. Yes, if we looked at, you know, you may say, well, the open space is only 2.755 acres. You know, you could discount the fact that, well, the trade-off in area as far as moving the stormwater basin back really isn't much of a trade-off, because without the waiver, the development doesn't happen in the first place. So it doesn't matter if you trade spots for the detention basin. Becomes a question as far as the benefit as far as future relocation of that trail, and retaining existing vegetation that acts as a buffer between anything that's going on the lots and the Grafton Land Trust land and the wetlands beyond that. That's, you know, in looking as far as a justification to provide that, you know, that is one of those things to consider. Is that beneficial to open space? Another thing to consider is that the nature of the development, at least in the flexible, is maintaining essentially the historic estate up front, because you don't have residential structures right from the front. So reason to choose the flexible over the conventional is the design to sort of push things back and to consolidate things. You know, but I think the open space is what they were trying to work with as best they could in order to provide a benefit, because the Grafton Land Trust land and trail network is basically ventures out onto through wetland areas and provides just more flexibility.
I think the only way I could justify giving waiver is that it's flexible, and if there's really a clear demarcation, clear showing that of the land that is part of the Grafton Land Trust that would be given to them, would what that land is and where people can go, and otherwise, you know, it becomes someone's backyard.
Yeah, exactly. That's why one of the reasons that these few acres we're talking about here as they're people's backyards.
Yeah.
You know, in reality, they're people's backyards, so they don't count for too much.
So I mean,
Maybe the trail a little bit, but you know, we tried to do something more to enhance the trail, and I don't think we did too well.
and that's where part of the challenge was, that some of the things that were thrown out, my recollection was that from Grafton Land Trust perspective, they were a little hard to maintain going forward. It would be great to have a raised walk, but then you're talking
Yeah.
You've
20
got-
years down the road, you have to rebuild it.
I know. But I'm more interested in some way of demarcation that it doesn't become the backyards,
So-
and that they understand that that
So the-
land is accessible to the public.
So the board is able to, and we've done this with other developments, where we've staked and put monuments at the open space borders with residential land. So Brook Meadow, for example, conservation has, do not, this is conservation, has warning signs that then are installed into the ground. One of the fortunate things is with the Grafton Land Trust, we could easily work in some sort of signage system that then identifies those back property lines to denote that this is Grafton Land Trust land. And that, dumping your lawn clippings over the line
Precisely.
is
Just it can't be done.
no, it's exactly. So
You
Enforced.
can't
For-
shoo kids off of it if they're back there on the land trust land.
yeah.
You can't get
Yeah,
unhappy about it.
and it's you're able to require within deeds language that basically says this is going to be installed at the property line and shall not be removed. You can include language in there that basically requires the monumentation of that back property line.
But
Because that's the kind of thing that I'd have to see, really included in the definitive, is I would have to see that there's a clear understanding that that land is not available for throwing your yard clippings or, shooing people off of it. That it is a public land for access to the wetlands back beyond. And that's
I'm looking more, not so much the part down by the water, but coming around
Right.
behind. And I don't know how you're going to enforce that. People will, up at the corner of Stowe and George Hill, there's a little segment in someone's lot that was wetlands, I think it still has its sign, permit, whatever. But the people have, there's still a fence there, but they moved the lawn into the other side of the fence. And even though it was reported to the Concom, nothing happens.
And-
So it's kind of a weak protection.
But it is one of those things that Grafton Land Trust regularly deals with trespass issues. And, we're able to support any effort by putting people on notice within deeds, requiring signage, requiring
How wide is that across?
in the back.
yeah.
Yeah, across, down here.
So basically this here,
Yeah, how wide is that section of open?
that is 80 feet
80 feet.
and
Yeah,
And am I understanding correctly that adding this in our determination is something that we can do now, that even though the public hearing is closed?
I'm sorry, what?
Adding the necessity of having the marked zones. Like
So for example,
independent-
it would just be included into the decision saying that, because the board can approve a special permit but deny a waiver based on the information that's provided, saying, however, the board would reconsider this if X, Y, and Z is documented and provided. That's just assuming, say, the board voted a majority to deny the waiver. You could have a 3-2 split, and saying, that, we want this stuff to be revisited, and that may provide, more support for it.
I don't think there's anything that requires we make a definite decision on the waiver
No,
at this
No.
stage. I understand the reasoning, but I could see denying the waiver and then getting busy on looking at the rules, and maybe the rules will change before it comes to the,
Before the definitive comes in?
before we have to get to the
Yeah.
end of it. And that may be the best thing. Does anybody else here, even out there, ever remember the change in the subdivision rules being made? I'm the only one who remembers doing it, I think.
Yeah, in the years
You might have heard about it.
Yes, in the 10 years I've been on the board, there have been almost 10 years. We've not changed the subdivision rules
Yes.
in that short time.
Yeah, in that short time. And do you have any idea how many times we said, we need to put that, we need to make a change for whatever it was?
I've lost
And
count.
would you please put it on the list, planner? And I think that's been at least 3 planners worth.
I was going to comment that whether or not we are approving or denying this waiver, I feel that we should probably visit this no later than one of our February meetings as far as having this on our discussion to try to address, because I would like this,
Sooner the better.
I would like this to be
Yeah.
modified if we deem it necessary by the town meeting.
It would,
The good
Well,
news-
remember,
Doesn't
you
go to
can,
Not a
town
bylaw.
meeting, does it?
yeah, I mean, that's where you can have a public hearing to modify it, at any.
Yeah, like I said, even though it's not
I
a
mean-
bylaw, I still would like it sooner.
I don't think it's a bylaw, so it doesn't go to town meeting.
Exactly. We don't have to have it at town meeting, but I would still like it
Yes.
done by town meeting as far as.
Oh,
timeline.
sure.
yeah, just as far as the timeline goes, yeah, because, the process for amending the subdivision rules is basically the board works on, decides, makes some
Time,
changes,
yeah.
proposes some changes. The board is required to hold a public hearing on the
Yeah.
subdivision rules and regs revisions. That's a public hearing, but
And then the vote,
Yeah,
I
that
believe,
is-
is a majority vote.
I think it's a majority
Yep.
vote of the board.
Yep.
Those present and voting.
Yes, so it's fairly straightforward for the board to do this. And we have what I think, although I don't have the list myself, but over the years, it seems like
There's several.
if there is such a list, it should be fairly substantial by now of things
Yeah.
that we need to,
Yeah.
and the topic, I mean, the two topics that frequently cause us some headaches, these dead ends and the roadway separation, may not be all that difficult to grapple with, if we dedicate some time to it.
Yes.
Yes.
We have, in addition to that, I know we have stormwater updates to the subdivision to reconcile them with the
With
stormwater
MS4, right?
bylaw, and that's,
I think, though, that we need to figure out what we're gonna do. I think,
as far as this decision is concerned, let's see if we
Put it
can
to
reach
bed.
some
It-
closure
it-
on
it
how we're
seems to
gonna
me we
proceed.
might be heading to closure by just saying, deny now and fix it in post.
I don't know, can't we,
One of the purposes of preliminary is to provide guidance.
Yeah,
So
you-
within that, you are able to provide guidance. So
Even a denial of a preliminary subdivision makes no difference to
Correct.
to the, except that it gives them.
the idea is it's supposed to provide guidance for the definitive.
yes. They can
still move
actually go
forward.
ahead with the definitive. Is
Yeah,
that-
we need to provide enough guidance to say,
And I
hey,
think that's what we're doing. Sort of.
propose something along these lines as a way of ensuring, maintaining property lines, providing notice to future abutters, demarcation, monumentation, signage, working with the land trust on how trespass can be prevented and/or
It's-
I almost
Yeah,
want to
with-
say
with-
adjudicated, but
Right, with-
enforced.
Yeah, with respect to the currently proposed waiver for roadway separation, while it would be really cool if we could get our subdivision rules and regs updated, in time for any new requirements and potentially for a change in this rule to obviate the need for a waiver, but no one can count on that. Right. And so in anticipation of the possibility that a waiver may remain necessary, some of what we've just talked about is in the direction of maximizing the public benefit
Yes.
and thus providing some additional justification for granting the waiver for those of us who are not currently convinced that the waiver should be granted.
Yeah.
And that's absolutely fair to look at, because typically in the past, when we've looked at waivers like this, we have looked to a public benefit helping to justify the granting of the waiver. And so, to the extent that whatever we've discussed this evening may lead to some additional perceived public benefit, that would be appropriate to work on that, as well as the board considering updating the rules and regulations.
Yeah, okay.
And then it's
It-
possible to approve it, possibly within a change that we make, without getting into a lot of stuff
It's
with legal.
18 minutes to 10, and I think we've beaten this up pretty well.
Yeah, Joe, do you feel that you have sufficient guidance at this point, Joe, to proceed?
Yep, I do.
Okay, then we can bring this discussion to a close. It's been, for the most part, I think it's been productive.
I do too.
It's-
We may
it's
get to
It's a
some-
struggle, it's a struggle for us to deal with these issues, and
I know.
and it always has.
One of the things, and we can also talk about how to pull together information. This just occurred to me because we actually went through this when I was in Wayland. We actually addressed this specifically. We developed language to talk about minimum separation between center lines of roads that then depended on the district, so that we had a R20, R30, R40, and 60 that then identified what that distance ended up being, because you had more dense neighborhoods where the same 600 didn't apply, but agricultural where 600 was actually viewed as like, or would be, say, viewed as not enough. So that depending on the district, it floated.
And that's something worth keeping in mind, because that's
Yes.
sort of intuitively, the density of the zoning district likely should have a relationship to the
I agree.
separation of roadways.
Okay,
So,
The-
food for thought, right?
yes, I think we've beaten it to death. Now it's 17 minutes to 10.
Yes. Do we want to take time this evening to discuss the Mill Redevelopment Overlay District?
They are here, I believe.
They're here.
Are you
No,
here
they're
to
not.
talk
No,
about that, or are you
because-
just here to be entertained?
He's on the clock. So he's always here to be entertained.
And entertaining.
So no, they're not here. But even if they were, this is really a board type thing. What I wanted to do, I'm working through just to finalize some of the stuff that the intern had worked on, and this was just a state, land use. But what I wanted to sort of identify is like what kind of things to keep in mind, because and the model bylaw does talk about needing to preserve things, does talk about flexibility to incorporate
Yeah, I mean, just a quick interruption here. As far as Wheeler Road is concerned,
Yeah. I
staff
think
is going to
there's
work
been
on
no way
drafting a decision. The board will take it up at their next opportunity to, review a draft decision and, if possible, vote on it I don't know, when, are you thinking we might have something to work on for the next meeting, December 9th?
that's what I'm hoping. Yes.
Okay, so we will assume,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
You're just gonna go and see about the signage and the light system, is that what it is?
You need to come up, and I don't think
Yeah.
it'd be hard to.
Sorry, I couldn't hear. If you could just come to
Oh,
the
I'm sorry.
podium.
I was just wondering, you're just gonna find out about the signage for the land trust area and the lighting?
No, I'm
You people.
I'm gonna put in how I'll frame the decision. Will probably be including guidance that then, following issuance of a decision, would then be something that would provide you with a direction to, for example, talk to the land trust about doing certain things with signage, or to work with your engineers to come up with language. The idea is to provide you with the guidance to address a concern that Right now, the board just doesn't have that information to then explicitly grant that waiver. Waivers would happen at the definitive subdivision stage as well, because then that gives everyone an opportunity to sort of revisit all of that information together.
I wonder if they couldn't, if we adopted new rules, say, whether they couldn't come in and ask for a waiver at that point, not within either a preliminary or a definitive. Because they don't, they'd need that waiver before they spend all the money on the definitive.
Well, I mean, basically, if the board adopts new regulations, technically, if they follow within 9 months from submission of the preliminary, the old ones fall into place. But if the new ones offer more flexibility, they're able to meet those.
But right now, they're gonna leave without, or we're gonna have a decision that doesn't have a waiver, the way we're talking. And if we examine the rules and change them, they could come in and ask for the waiver, because I think in their position, they need the waiver before they start, full development work.
Yeah.
So it'd be better not. For
And
them.
So for
And I think
example,
that
we
they
did
could-
that. We did that with Grist Mill, where we basically said, "Come back, demonstrating this
Yeah.
to
Well,
get."
But
to
you're
revisit.
saying come back and demonstrate. I'm saying we change the rule and then they apply under the new rule. Or some combination.
Yeah, I think give me a chance just to put things down in writing, and then, as all good planners do, kick that bucket down the street until we.
Yeah, I think.
Deal with it again.
Right, I think the objective here would be to, as well as we can, to, to give you some guidance, understanding how you can move forward with this. With some, maybe some suggestions, and maybe, as Bob says, maybe if before things get too much farther down the road for you, we have some rules changes that would be helpful for you, then, I think one part of your suggestion, Bob, seems to be that make it, facilitate them doing additional design work based upon new rules, if new rules come into existence. So it's a little bit up in the air right now, but what I think we're hoping for is to give you as much guidance as we can as to how best for you to move forward with this, and perhaps even on what time scale.
Awesome, thank you, Mr. Chairman, thank you, members of the board. I think that the boundary lines, working with Grafton Land
The
Trust
hearing's not-
is something
Yeah.
we can certainly go for.
The hearing's done.
Yeah, I think that's one of the key issues.
But we'll wait for guidance from Joe.
Yep.
Okay.
Now, 11 minutes to 10.
All
I
right.
move that we allow the meeting to go past 10 o'clock if it does.
Ooh, that's too.
I'll second it, but only under duress.
I'm waiting
You
for
want-
someone to say,
you
I
want to put a
second
time
with
limit on that?
15 minutes.
On December, on the next
I
meeting.
am pretty objective.
I'm gonna vote
On the
no
chair that I do.
I'm gonna put on my Ellie Santa hat and vote no.
All right.
Or maybe.
Yeah.
Okay, so what else?
The chair says that motion has been made and seconded, but I'm gonna, a motion of that nature tends to be non-debatable, so all in favor?
Aye.
No,
Opposed?
aye.
All right. I'm confused.
He doesn't want to even consider past 10 o'clock.
Justin,
Yes.
Oh, well,
Bob,
No.
Dave, no.
No.
Prabhu, no.
No.
Yes.
Linda, yes.
Dave, you
All
just
right,
clarity. You
The
said
motion
no.
fails?
The motion fails by a vote of 2 in favor and 3 against.
We
That
aren't.
that could
have-
come up again a little later on.
At the moment, we have 11 minutes.
okay, so basically, what I'd like
No.
you to do,
Yes.
10.
if we, what I'd like you to do is just take a look at the model that's here. I'm pulling together just to clean up and make sure that it's a little bit more readable. Some of the memo work from the intern. But one of the main things, and you'll notice, even though it may seem like it's a long document, there's not a lot of provisions. So what I'd like if the board could do is just look through and say, highlight like what things do you like, what things don't you like, It doesn't have to be that complex. We can just rely on special permit process, allow for list of uses. We can also come up with a whole new overlay. Some towns do it that just say any building that is of 1920s and earlier that was manufacturing purposes. Here's how you can reuse it. That's the idea, is just trying to identify how can we treat some of these mill buildings a little differently than what the underlying zoning is. Main thing is that, for example, the Farnhamsville mill, and then even the one on Brigham Hill, they're actually zoned, the one right around the corner.
Oh, the
44 Brigham Hill.
Hickey leather.
Formerly leather, yeah.
One that some of us still refer to as hickey leather.
Those
Maybe the
are
last thing, I don't know.
those are mill developments that are laid out for industrial type uses, but the underlying zoning basically is residential devoted. And to what extent allowing for redevelopment and reinvestment of those may require expanding the permitted uses that occur there, so that it's not only residential, but that the uses that occur wouldn't overtly conflict with residential. And I think that's one of the balances. So you're not going to have Tesla operating a car factory in one of the factories.
No, we need battery factory. That's their big factory.
That's what Centec and Grafton Science Park are for. But just to give some thought.
Yeah, I did go through it, and I was almost overwhelmed with trying, if you were doing these things that are written down here, all the interactions they would have with the current situation, and how many overlays do we have, and what rules conflict with which ones, or it's just it's gonna be a 4-year course to understand our bylaw.
So 2 terms? Everyone needs to be on the board for 2 terms to fully understand it.
That's absolutely true. First term, I didn't get it. I really didn't. So I agree. Can we go back to the last thing? I know that we've gone beyond it, but I do have a question
There's
of you.
plenty of time for another extension request, Bob. Yeah.
I'm
can't
going
hear
to
a
ask
word
you
he's
to do
saying.
something. That
Something about Bob.
blurb you had from Wayland,
Something about
anything
no.
like that would be awfully helpful to the board.
Yeah.
If we got information like that,
Yeah.
to be able to look at intersections and
Yeah.
get an idea of a way
Yeah.
to structure things.
And literally, I had I had forgotten about it. I must have had such a traumatic mental block from being there that I forgot about it for a number of years. And all of a sudden, I'm like, wait a second, we just did this.
Yeah. But
So, no, that's what we'd have to pull together.
Yeah, and if we can get that, if you can, just email us that kind of thing,
Yeah.
any information on
Yep.
what kind of separations, and what are some of the basis of those ideas, I think it would be a huge help to this board in
Absolutely.
coming up with a new reg.
I think also, moving forward again, to the mills.
Yes, now.
It'd be good to, in the 5 minutes that remain, I think it would be good to begin to enumerate what properties we're actually thinking about. You mentioned to,
And part of it also, just giving thought, to New England Village, and because you have 3 mill buildings right up there. 4 if you include an old one that primarily is used as a single family home, but primarily the ones right, Washington Mills, those types of things. You have the big, the ones that are on to the
North Main
west
Street.
of the common area there, right at the end, the older buildings, and the ones right on North Main Street. That's industrial. So those are going to be governed by the zoning bylaws or really end use table as it relates to industrial. But thinking as far as, well, what happens in the future, what
that might interact with, I've been interested in revisiting some of the edges of the industrial zone, like right by Quinsigamon Corner and up
Yeah.
where there isn't any mill. And maybe we can
Yeah.
get two things together there.
Yeah. Yep.
All right, in the 5 minutes remaining, I
Four.
think we have, depending on which clock, my clock gives us four and change. There's at least a little bit we need to hear by way of a staff report.
I was really waiting for the meeting to end
Do you have anything?
before saying anything. How fast does this rumor mill work?
What's
Yes.
Oh, Lisa didn't make over there. I am accepting a position with the town of Littleton as their assistant town administrator.
Oh.
as of
It would be the after the first week of January. So things aren't official. I haven't officially resigned. They haven't even met to appoint. But I know because of questions, because there's a posting in the hallway of town hall that people are inquiring what's going on. So that's what's going on.
Bummer.
Now,
You wait for the last.
There, I have various terms for that.
I don't think bummer was one of them.
Not the one of them.
Bummer would be one. From the perspective of the town of Grafton, it's a great big loss.
Yes. Huge.
From the perspective of Joe Layden, it's a good
it's
career
a
move.
step forward, but yeah.
agreed.
So, is there anything else that we need to know from the staff in the?
You mean I could have used?
Like in
I could have waited until I was off camera.
a minute.
No, I mean we are hard at work trying to lay out some of these applications that came in. Again, because we're under timing for a shot clock, and that will include basically just having a flow diagram, how, and I'll coordinate with Dave, how foresaw handling these. Some of them I'd expect just are open and then continue to the next meeting because there's just going to be too much to do. And that meeting may even be in January. But some of them are pretty straightforward. Some of them are not that complicated. One of them could be a little bit more complicated, mainly because it has to do with a 1-year extension and then with adult marijuana cultivation, grow for an existing site that the board already approved. And then the public hearing for the subdivision after we meet on the 9th, because they are also going through conservation. Like the ridings, you continue that a month and a half later because there's a lot of issues that need to be resolved on the conservation side. That's gonna, as members know, I'm watching the clock tick down. That's not a 1 month, 2 month, 3 month process. The board's gonna be involved with that for the next 6-7 months easily. So, and I'll be working with the front office as far as identifying any sort of transition plan, getting graves. I was looking through minutes in 2003, so I know Bob's very familiar with what potentially happens. And
Bob remembers being the only one for 9 months or something like that back with Megan.
yeah,
When she came on.
yeah, I don't foresee that being the case, but
When she went on.
It's almost 10 o'clock.
I move we adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded that we adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Opposed, so voted.